Hi, this is Jules in Vancouver, and I'm talking with.
Lenny.
So, you've got Lenny and Jules here in Vancouver. And today we are talking about an aspect of the genderqueer life that is kind of confusing, and really, in discussing it, we're exploring this very much ourselves and learning about it. But it's things which we witness in other people as well. So I've just been talking to Lenny before we went on air here, and what I was saying was that for many people who are trans, as they move down this path, they start on it with very much a view of the aesthetic. So cross-dressing is a kind of universal start point, if you like. And for some people it progresses further, for others it doesn't. But for people who are moving towards a trans lifestyle, cross-dressing obviously is a highly aesthetic aspect. Now, as someone gets more involved in that world, then we start to see that it's not merely an aesthetic thing, it starts to become very much a psychological thing. And there are aspects to a trans life which are radically different from simply what one wears. Now, Lenny, you then said around a woman's journey.
I think that you had actually talked about that someone you had met had maybe an unrealistic view of what to be a woman looks like. And I was saying that's actually sort of what women go through as they move into puberty. There's a huge industry around for women for adjusting our bodies because most women are not women enough for what is advertised what a woman should look like. Little girls want boobs long before they should. You're a late bloomer. You need a nose job. You have a masculine jaw. So only 10% of women on this planet actually look like the world tells you a woman should look like. Anyway, you need to be thinner. We have to wear corsets. We have to wear bras. We have to wear butt lifting Spanx. So even as a cisgendered woman, most women aren't women enough.
Well, this is interesting, though. So you used an interesting phrase there. You said the world tells you this. Well, who are the influencers? I think that's really key here. When it's your family, that's one thing. When it's 17 magazine, I believe that still exists, I'm not sure, it might be rather different. And equally, when it's the church youth groups magazine, it might look different again. And of course, then you've got your peer group at school. And depending who's influencing that could be positive or negative.
Well, just look at TikTok videos.
Jeez.
Right?
It's terrifying.
It's terrifying. What is the visual definition of woman and what a woman should look like? So you're coming up into this impossible physical goals. I'm saying this wrong. So then if you put on top of that you're say a misaligned male, assigned male at birth person who is not or is trans or is looking at these things, you're also looking at these impossible beauty standards. But actually, if you looked around and realized that actually there's a lot of women who are struggling with exactly the same impossible standards. I will never have that shape. Maybe I did when I was 17 for like a minute and I was dieting my face off. It's impossible for a lot of women. So it's interesting as you have been going through this journey, Jules, and you've been talking about, how I wish I had X or I wish I had Y, like physical attributes. And I'm finding myself going, how you dress that is this and this and this, because I'm surrounded by women who are cisgendered women, assigned female at birth, and they're struggling with it. They don't fit in within the society's version of what a woman is. So a very dear friend of mine just put out this post around, um, and it's within a group of queer people. When did you first shave your head? Like a lot of us in the 90s shaved our heads, right? It was this very Sinead O'Connor sort of shaved head thing. And we were having this conversation around a dinner table. All of us had at some point in the 90s shaved our head. But what the reaction was from other people, bosses that said, "Oh, are you a boy now because you shaved your head?" And how people shifted the way that they looked at you when, as a female and female presenting person, you shaved your head in the 90s. I remember that I wore makeup, I wore heels, I wore dresses. I was very femme in the 90s, and I shaved my head, and how utterly shocking that was to have a super short haired female presenting woman, that it was a gender fuck then just to change your hairstyle.
Right.
So it was an interesting thing of what are the rules of gender, and to
have
kind
a
of
feeling if you
assure.
were to talk to many teenagers now, they would be saying, "Have you shaved your head yet?" rather than "When did you first shave your head?" Because most of them just consider it another hairstyle. It's become normalized.
To a certain degree, but not necessarily for females. It's still shocking.
Interesting.
For feminine presenting females.
Right. But there's an interesting thing in what you say, where I'm just going back to some of those TERF arguments, where some more TERFy type opinions say things like, "You'll never know our journey," which I do believe is a very good point. I'm not going to know what childbirth feels like, for example.
Well, neither am I.
However, there are many common hurdles that do have to be overcome.
Exactly.
Which perhaps we don't really focus on very much, which, in this instance, when you're looking at especially the teenagers, and God knows, especially with the way some of the laws in the US are going at the moment, these teenagers need the best advice they can get. And they're basically being told, you are not allowed to get advice.
Right.
And anyone who gives it is breaking the law.
Yeah.
Now, for a young trans person trying to move ahead and find their way, to try and look female, they almost have to choose a look. And where that comes from, what the influencer for that is really interesting, because it's kind of dangerous.
But here's the thing, how to look female, i.e. how to look female, that 98% of females on this planet cannot reach that goal either.
Right.
Like 98% of cisgendered females
right.
cannot reach that goal either.
Well,
we never could without surgery.
Absolutely.
So what's interesting to me is that journey that, say, like you are going through. I am finding myself remembering back to my 13-year-old self saying to you words that I wish I could say to my 13-year-old self, which was, "You don't need to lose. No, you look fine. Your boobs are great, honey. No, so you're tall. That's great. It's okay to look different than what the media portrays as this is what a woman is supposed to look like."
Well, we've got a situation where people are basically trying to be celebrity impersonators. If you don't look like Shania Twain, or
celebrity impersonators are celebrity impersonators. They don't look
course.
like that either.
Exactly. It kind of ends up being a circle that gets tighter and tighter and tighter until what we all look like, I don't know what.
Yeah, like nobody, like, okay, there are maybe a few people that look like that, but nobody actually looks like that without...
Well, this is an interesting, and I know this is a big segue now. I happen to know that you've just come back from an island where you stayed in the house of a woman who's a famous a blue water solo sailor, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, when we choose our heroes, to some degree, we're choosing who are we going to emulate. Now, I know I don't look much like Superman, but maybe when I was a kid, if I was very into Superman, some of the influence was, well, aesthetically, that's cool. Now, the thing about someone who's ocean racing or doing anything like that is they're pretty much covered from head to foot in weather gear. But they are still heroic, aren't they?
Yeah.
Now, the images of whether they are women or men actually is somewhat irrelevant. It's people who are going out, doing things which are exciting, things we would like to emulate or like to aspire to.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's where we should find our role model or our our target to aim at. Now, in the case of your friend, that's the woman who's done all sorts of very exciting sailing. In her case, the aesthetic isn't particularly feminine, is it?
I think this is the thing. I'm going to go back to what is feminine? Is it nurturing? Is it, this is it. We're having to decide what is feminine. And unfortunately, we keep ending up landing on feminine is an aesthetic. Feminine is, delicate flower, small-waisted, high-pitched voice, and long flowing locks.
I wouldn't particularly label Xena, warrior princess, who is one of my personal favorites, as particularly a delicate flower.
She's still wearing hardly any clothes.
Yes. Anyway.
Yeah. I know what you were just picturing there, Jules.
The long and the short.
Put your tongue back in your mouth.
The long and the short of it is perhaps we should be careful who we try and emulate, or maybe we should just choose very carefully. And the way we emulate them isn't really about the aesthetic. It's actually more to do with the nature of the person completely. Now, going back to where we sort of started this, the journey towards a more feminine self, it's very dangerous just to focus on the aesthetic, because in some instances it's simply not really attainable, the aesthetic we choose. In other instances, it can mean very little unless it's backed up with a lot of the character and the nature of who that person might be. Now, of course, these are just targets. These are just goals, and they may or may not be achieved, but to some degree they serve a purpose in that they give us something to aim for.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's very, very important that as one embarks on this journey, regardless of gender, we think about the goal with a degree of flexibility. We're going to make it our own. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think I'm going to look very much like Lucy Lawless in the next few months. However, there are aspects of her nature, her determination, her commitment, her love of her friends, things like that, which actually, yes, I can aspire to.
Now, as you said that you're not going to attain Lucy Lawless.
I'm not going to get a chest like that.
Right, exactly. But, and don't be offended. Do not be offended, because I know this person doesn't maybe have your political bent. But as far as age and physical type and grace and strength and smarts, Barbara Bush.
Interesting woman. Yeah. A lot of dignity.
And stylistically rather famous. She is famous for actually being quite for where she was in life, really stylistic. Now,
she looked great.
Okay.
And I think she backed it up with her character.
And she absolutely did. Right? Okay. There's a style icon.
Yeah.
I would say Barbara Bush was a style icon for our generation. Some people may be like, who's Barbara Bush? But, that's the younger generation. Was a sort of style icon that would sort of fit within a different sort of body type that might be more attainable.
Yeah, well, I think that's a very important thing. A lot of people who I come across in the trans world are trying to be sort of 16-year-old schoolgirl. And that's not really something which a 55-year-old man is really ever going to achieve. However,
you see this, though, with 65-year-old women out there who are putting on those Spanx and getting the lifts and getting the tucks.
I'm afraid no one, regardless of their gender, over 45 should wear a thong.
Right. There's
With the possible exception of Tina Turner.
Yeah.
But it is certainly an interesting thing that the very same struggle that a lot of people who are trans are experiencing is actually a struggle that many women also experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that many of those people are coming into those visions or having goals around creating a more feminine appearance to the world at a time where there isn't a lot of style mavens.
Absolutely.
But they're going through they're going through hormonally. A lot of times there's hormone therapy. So they're going through hormonally puberty along with gray hair. And there isn't a lot of style mavens out there to be looking at,
well,
the
if one's
style
checking
icons.
TikTok for style, just shoot yourself now.
Right. So in a way, I'm really thinking, I guess where I was commenting before we even started recording was that you and other people coming into this journey a little bit later on in life are actually exactly going through what teenage girls are going through, which is trying to look around the world going, what is my style? What do I look like? I will never be able to reach these goals.
There was a very interesting podcast, Gender Rebels, and I don't think I'm their favorite person because we're slightly on some of the Fiona Dobson content. We're a little bit more driven towards kind of the sensual and erotic stuff, which can be perceived as being somewhat misogynistic. But I think it was Faith on Gender Rebels raised a very, very good point about her lost girlhood. Now, she has transitioned and she's doing wonderfully, and she's actually very, very good on her podcast. But as a trans woman, the recognition that she never experienced teenage girlhood and almost a sense of
lucky
of
her.
Well, she looked at it with a sense of grieving, which I thought was very, very interesting. It was very sensitively written. It was really very good. But to some degree, I think we maybe do experience these things, as you said, admittedly at a much later time. But they are essentially the same questions. It's who am I? How do I relate to the world? And what does it all mean for me? Mm-hmm. I think, kind of in conclusion on this, the reality is the trans journey is a somewhat lonely one and a difficult one. However, it's really about becoming the person you're meant to be, not this woman or this man or anything else. These are slightly wider things that come up in the trans journey, but they are really about becoming the person you're meant to be. Now, that could be a sort of a Xena, or it could be a Barbara Bush, or it could be, who knows, a Shania Twain. But those are sort of little goals with the lights in the distance that maybe we steer slightly towards, or it could even be, who knows, a George Takei. Who knows?
Who knows?
The gender actually doesn't matter as much as the qualities, and we bring what we can to that equation, and each one is, of course, completely unique.
There's a great quote, one of my favorite quotes from David Bowie, which was, "Aging is the process of becoming the person you were meant to be."
That is a beautiful thing for us to wrap up on. Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you, Jules.
And we'll do another one of these before too long, hopefully, but you can always find interesting content like this on FionaDobson.com.